She's the former Deputy Chair of UKIP, Suzanne Evans. Hello, Suzanne. What do you think about this?
Well, I think it's quite astonishing, really. On Wednesday, we had the Information Commissioner's Office saying that there had been clear breaches of data protection when the former CEO of NatWest, Alison Rose, spoke to the BBC reporter Simon Jack at a dinner, I gather, and said that Farage didn't have enough money in his bank account and that's why it was being closed. And now we seem to have something completely at odds with that finding from the internal investigation that NatWest has done itself, saying that Dame Alison's, saying that the closure of the bank account was lawful and that Dame Alison simply made an honest mistake. I have to question whether that kind of flexibility in terms of arguably corporate misdoing would apply to every other employee of NatWest Bank. It does seem to me that I suspect a lot of people, had they done the same, had they talked about perhaps even mine or yours bank accounts at a dinner party, they might well have been sacked forthwith, and there would be absolutely no question of them getting £2.4 million for the next year, because that's effectively Dame Alison's leave notice period, plus all the bonuses. Now, of course, NatWest is still considering whether or not they're going to pay this money. But today, they're certainly taking their time about making a decision, and they're certainly not committing themselves at this stage. So I think it's we've got various organisations here saying different things. Ultimately, NatWest is going to have to make a decision on the money. But of course, Dame Alison has also already, it's been reported, threatened to sue NatWest if they don't pay her that 11 million quid.
Yeah. I've got some advice for NatWest. Don't give her that money. Just don't give it to her. She doesn't deserve it. She's done wrong. Now, I believe Mr Farage was a former colleague of yours, Suzanne. So let's have a look at Nigel making his feelings very clear.
Haven't they seen the other UKIP members, Conservative members and Brexit Party MEPs who've been debanked? It's a list as long as your arm. And this gets to the heart of it. The FCA themselves are overtly political. They have been putting huge pressure on the banks and financial institutions to follow the diversity and inclusion agenda. Yes, of course, that matters far more than protecting customers' money.
Exactly. Actually, to be fair, this cuts both ways. Some left-wing people have had their accounts closed as well. Banks should not be closing anyone's accounts down because of their political views. I love your revelation, to me at least, that Alison Rose is planning to sue NatWest if they don't pay her all this money.
That's certainly been reported.
Well, if that's what's being reported, I've got some advice. I've got lots of advice for everyone today. My advice to Dame Alison is don't do this. Don't do this, because you'll end up looking even worse than you do now. Right now, though, what we've got, Suzanne, is this, if you ask me. This is the British establishment at work. Don't fall for that lie that the British establishment is right-wing and, you know, all members of the golf club and all that sort of thing. No, no, no. The British establishment today are Guardian readers. They work at the BBC. They're all left-leaning, and they have gathered around Dame Alison Rose to protect her. If Dame Alison Rose was a right-wing Brexiteer, for her sins, for her alleged crime, she'd be behind bars now, wouldn't she?
Well, let's just look at it objectively. I think we have a situation, don't we, when all the big banks came out in favour of Remain during the 2016 referendum. So they're not exactly going to be on Nigel Farage's side. I'm sure they were absolutely furious when Leave won that referendum campaign. And for me, I think that going to the heart of this matter, we had Nigel Farage originally made a subject access request to Coutts to find out just what they'd been saying about him behind the scenes. And in that report that he got, that he wrestled away from Coutts, they mentioned Brexit 86 times and talked about his political opinions. So come on, let's be honest. This was a politically motivated scenario, wasn't it? That NatWest can't even agree on why they closed his account unless you factor that in as the pretty obvious answer as far as I'm concerned. On the one hand, you've got the report that's come out today saying it was because his bank account wasn't making them any money. And then, of course, we had Dame Alison Rose saying that it was because he wasn't making enough money himself personally. So two different equivocal statements there. But for me, it's also the quite horrific text that we've seen in recent days between NatWest employees talking about Nigel Farage, even saying they'd like to get violent with him. my view, and it is only my opinion, and I probably can't prove it, but it looks to me as though Alison Rose, whether she knew it or not, was heading up a culture at NatWest Bank that was vehemently anti-Brexit, vehemently anti-Nigel Farage. And I think there really are serious questions to answer there. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, is also going to be launching its own independent inquiry. It'll be very interesting to see what they have to say.
Well, you made that statement there, Suzanne, as if it was very controversial. But you know, I agree with exactly what you said, by the way. But if you look at the texts that were revealed in this subject access request, I mean, Nigel himself said that he put this in imagining to get some sort of soft soap fob off, and was given a massive great file, and he couldn't believe his eyes. And amongst all of these documents were these texts, internal messages sent by members of the staff calling him an awful human being. We're going to hound him out of the country. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall. I wish I was the one who rang him up to close. They hate him. You know, they hate him. They're manic Remainers, as clearly as Dame Alison Rose, and they don't like him because he's a Brexiteer, because he was very successful in that endeavour. He is their anti-hero, and they persecuted him for it. It's quite clear and obvious, and to preside over that, yeah, Alison Rose deserves punishment, if you ask me.
I agree. And as Nigel said in his clip that you played just a moment ago, he's not the only one here. There have been umpteen other Brexit Party and UKIP MEPs and supporters who found themselves in this position of basically having bank accounts closed or being unable to open one. But it has to be said that that is the fault of the Conservative Party. And of course, Jeremy Hunt, in fact, has said that he had problems as well. You know, the Chancellor of the Exchequer fell foul of these the new laws brought in by the Conservatives that said that banks have to be much more cautious when they're giving accounts to people with political connections. I tried to get some financing, in fact, actually to buy a house a couple of years ago, and I was flagged up as one of these politically exposed persons. Now, I didn't proceed with the purchase, but it did surprise me because under the law, the strict letter of the law, I haven't been in public office since 2000 and any kind of public office, not elected since 2014, and not in any kind of political party publicly since 2017. I should not have been flagged up under that legislation, and yet I was. And I think, you know, the Treasury's got to get a grip of this, Parliament's got to get a grip of this, because it is impossible to function in today's society without a bank account. And if people such as myself, who are no longer involved in any kind of political party issues, are being flagged up as politically exposed persons and purely on that basis suspected of money laundering, well, it's a terrible situation to be in. It's simply not acceptable. And I think this legislation was brought in without due care and attention, and now it's coming back to bite even the very politicians who sat in Parliament and voted for it.
Yeah, they've got to tighten up this politically exposed person thing, because my particular favourite of someone who was victimised by these rules was Nigel Lawson, recently deceased, sadly, former Chancellor of the Exchequer under Margaret Thatcher. His granddaughter had trouble getting a bank account because she's a politically exposed person. She's got Down syndrome. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's insane. And I've heard other stories from people, from former politicians, former MPs, whose daughters, wives, partners have been treated the same way. Yeah. It's simply not acceptable. You know, we are heading, and I particularly don't want this to happen, but it looks like we're heading towards a cashless society. The idea that people are going to be deprived of bank accounts and therefore basically of even buying subsistence food because you can't do anything if you haven't got a bank account, it's just horrific, actually. It's communist in the extreme. Totally unacceptable. It's got to be sorted. Ideally, before the next election. I think the Conservatives would do themselves a great big favour if they could sort it out before the next election and prove that they had a little bit of bottle to actually shake things up a little bit at the top of the establishment.
And prove, horror of horrors, that they might actually be Conservatives. But don't count on that, Suzanne. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.